people don't understand. Like, The Shining is like, what is that? 82 or something like that?
1980, I think.
Is it?
I think so.
Is that what it is? Yeah. So 1980, people, you've got to understand. We're talking about a whole different world.
Yeah.
There's no special effects.
So it's the late 1970s, and Stephen King is the new king of horror literature. He just published The Shining, a chilling novel about a family isolated in a haunted hotel, drawn partly from King's own experiences, like his own fears and struggles with drinking and fatherhood. So one day Stephen King is shaving. He's like, oh, I think I drank way too much last night. And then all of a sudden he hears... So when he answers the phone, the man on the other end is like, "Hi, this is Stanley Kubrick, you know, the genius director, blah blah blah. And you know what? I really want to make The Shining my next film." So at this point, Stephen King is going, "What? I mean, you're Stanley Kubrick, and you want to turn my book into a movie? Oh, hell yeah." Now Kubrick, ever the curious intellect, doesn't waste time with pleasantries. In fact, he dives straight into a deep philosophical discussion. According to Stephen King, at 7 o'clock one morning, Kubrick calls him up out of the blue and goes, "I believe ghost stories are fundamentally optimistic. If there are ghosts, it means we survive death, right?" So Stephen King, who's still wiping sleep away from his eyes, is taken aback and goes, "Okay, but Stanley, what the hell?" And that's when Kubrick simply responds by saying, "I don't believe in hell." Now this bizarre early morning call is our first hint that Kubrick and King might not be on the same wavelength. Here's Kubrick approaching The Shining like some kind of intellectual puzzle about the supernatural, while King, well, he's the guy who sincerely believes in the supernatural evil at the heart of his story. So at this point, Stephen King is going, "I don't think Stanley understands what's actually going on in this hotel, right? Like, I don't think he understands my vision. And maybe that's why he's looking for evil in the characters. I mean, this hotel represents pure evil. And because Stanley does not understand this fact, he's going to look for evil in my characters." In other words, Kubrick sees The Shining as more of a psychological drama, a family tragedy with ghostly seasoning, whereas King wrote it as a full-blooded ghost story about an evil hotel that drives a good man mad. But little did he know at the time that this fundamental difference in vision is going to become a big deal. Now, despite their differing outlooks, at first everything seems fine. Kubrick is enthusiastic about the novel. He reportedly even told a friend that The Shining was the only thing which was ever sent to me that I found good or that I liked. Now, Stephen King, being a former movie buff and someone who admires Kubrick's work, is cautiously optimistic. He even writes his own draft screenplay for The Shining, hoping to help translate his vision to the screen. But here's where cracks begin to form. When Kubrick gets Stephen King's screenplay, he goes, "I'm not reading this," and essentially doesn't even give it a second glance. Instead, Kubrick chooses another collaborator, novelist Diane Johnson, to co-write the script with him, largely because he admired one of her books. And the thing is, when Stanley read Stephen King's work, he was like, he's a very smart guy, but I don't like the way he writes his stories. Now at this point, Stephen King is not a big name in the industry yet, and he doesn't have creative control. So he steps back and lets Kubrick get to work on The Shining screenplay and production. Now when production ramps up, it becomes very clear that Kubrick intends to make The Shining very much his film, even if that means changing significant elements of King's novel. Additionally, Stephen King's involvement at this stage is very minimal. Aside from that one phone call and a single face-to-face meeting, the author isn't really consulted. And just to make things even more weird, Kubrick would call Stephen King at odd hours occasionally, not to ask for story input, but to ask him weird questions about life and death. He would call and say things like, "So Stephen, do you believe in God? And what do you think about the nature of the afterlife?" Nevertheless, Stephen King would indulge in these questions, but still he was not asked to collaborate on the story. So soon after this, casting decisions and script details begin to reach King, and his anxiety only grows. Kubrick cast Jack Nicholson, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, as Jack Torrance, the story's protagonist, or perhaps antagonist in Kubrick's take. So immediately Stephen King is going, "I don't like this," because in King's novel, Jack Torrance is an ordinary man, a loving father and husband struggling with alcoholism and anger issues, who slowly descends into madness under the Overlook's evil influence.
What about Jack Nicholson in The Shining? Were you pleased with that?
I thought he did a wonderful job
Yeah.
in Shining. Enjoyed it very much.
How did you feel about the movie itself?
Well, I feel both ways. I got to see it 4 times because of commitments one place and another. And there are an awful lot of things about that movie that I think are flawless and beautiful and just marvelous. And then there are other times when I feel as though I'd given Stanley Kubrick a live grenade and he heroically threw his body on it.
And the thing is, Stephen King was going, I really want my character to feel like an ordinary man, someone that any person could be. Instead, Kubrick chose Jack Nicholson, who was fresh off the role of a deranged mental patient in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So essentially, Stephen King was going, I don't want Jack Nicholson in the role. He looks crazy. In King's own words, he said, Jack Nicholson, though a fine actor, was all wrong for the part. The audience automatically identified him as a loony from the first scene. So in King's eyes, Kubrick had fundamentally gutted the story's emotional core by turning Jack Torrance into a cartoonish madman, rather than a tragic hero corrupted by evil. And it wasn't just Jack Torrance. King was equally upset about how the film portrayed Wendy Torrance, Jack's wife. In the novel, Wendy is a strong, complex woman who, while initially demure, finds her inner power to protect her son. While in Kubrick's film, Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, appears to be emotionally frail and hysterical, essentially a woman who only exists to scream, cry, and swing a bat ineffectively. King hated this portrayal, and he didn't blame Duvall at all. He blamed Kubrick's writing and direction. He said, Shelley Duvall as Wendy is really one of the most misogynistic characters ever put on film. She's basically just there to scream and be stupid, and that's not the woman that I wrote about.
Have you seen the film Groundhog Day? Well, that's what it was like.
I had never done more than, say, 15 takes before in my life. So it was a great change for me to do so many. After you do a certain number, it sort of goes dead. And then 5 more takes or so, and it revives itself. And by then you know the scene like the back of your hand. And you can make no mistakes with it. And you forget all reality other than what you're doing. Stay away from me.
As Kubrick's The Shining diverges more and more from King's blueprint, other changes pile up. Major plot points from the novel were altered or removed. In King's book, for example, topiary animals come to life and mess with the characters. But Stanley was going, I don't like that idea. Let's use a hedge maze instead. More crucially, the ending was completely changed. King's novel ends in an explosive finale, literally. In his ending, Jack Torrance redeems himself in a moment of clarity, telling his young son, Danny, that he loves him. And then he sacrifices himself when the boiler explodes in the hotel, destroying the evil within him. Now, this ending was meant to bring the story full circle. But Kubrick, on the other hand, he wanted Jack to freeze to death alone in the snow after chasing Danny through the hedge maze. No catharsis, no redemption, he's simply outwitted by his son and then he dies off screen. To Stephen King, this ending was devastating. Now, when speaking on Kubrick's version of the movie, Stephen King said, "It's certainly beautiful to look at, gorgeous sets, all those steady cam shots. I used to call it a Cadillac with no engine in it. You can't do anything with it except admire it as a sculpture." In essence, Kubrick made a film that was cool, detached, and full of memorable imagery, but for King it lacked the human warmth and narrative drive that he believes good horror movies should have. Fast forward to May 1980, Kubrick's The Shining comes out in theaters, and Stephen King goes to see the final movie. And it's a gut punch. Privately, he's extremely unhappy with what he's watching. However, at the time, he bites his tongue. Stephen King went on to later say, "When it opened, a lot of the reviews weren't very favorable, and I was one of those reviewers. I kept my mouth shut at the time, but I didn't care for it much." Now, the initial response to The Shining in 1980 was mixed. Many people found it very slow or baffling, though over the years it grew into a revered classic. Now, Stephen King's dislike of Kubrick's The Shining had some real-world consequences beyond just words. For one, it taught him how to take control of his work, as he learned that when you hand over your novel to a powerful director, you might lose creative control completely. He said, "These days, when doing deals for my books, I want $1, and I want approvals over the screenwriter, the director, and the principal cast. Stephen King also decided to reclaim The Shining in his own way. For instance, in the 1990s, when he had built a lot more fame and industry power, King got a chance to produce a new adaptation of The Shining, this time as a TV miniseries that would stick closely to his novel. So in 1997, Stephen King's The Shining aired on ABC as a 3-part miniseries, with King himself writing the teleplay and executive producing. King finally put on screen all the bits Kubrick had left out: the moving hedge animals, the exploding boiler, the more loving father-son relationship. He even gave himself a cameo role as an orchestra conductor, and this was all essentially his way of saying, I'm taking my story back.
It was all over. The movie was done. I saw Stanley again and went to his house for dinner. And he asked me he said, how did you like my movie? And I only seen it once, and I didn't love Shining the first time I saw it. I have since seen Shining 25 times, one of my favorite pictures. Kubrick films tend to grow on you. You have to see them more than once, but the wild thing is, I defy you to name me one Kubrick film that you can turn off once you started. It's impossible.
So I guess the question is, do you like The Shining as it came out back in the day, or do you like the ABC miniseries that came out? Let me know down below. See you in the next one.